Thanks, Lisa and the panel. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I'm absolutely convinced that this day, this week, this period of time will go down as the time when humanity woke up to the climate emergency and business led the transition. And we're going to continue that conversation now and deepen it. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Paul Simpson, the CEO of CDP. Many of you will know CDP for running the world's environmental disclosure platform, where this year 8,300 companies have disclosed through us on climate change. Many of you, probably all of you in the room, what this means for your business, what you're doing to reduce those emissions. So I've had the pleasure of doing that for 18 years, and in the last 18 years, can proudly say we've pretty much normalised environmental sustainability disclosure. Every business knows you have to do it, you should do it. If you get it right, there are benefits of doing it. And here today, we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about targets, science-based targets, the 1.5 targets that we've already heard about. And I think really the reason I talk about the trend in disclosure, there are many other trends, but now the trends in targets, is this is becoming the new norm for business. It will no longer be acceptable to your customers, clients, shareholders and others not to have ambitious targets, not to be working towards 1.5. We know that is a little bit challenging, particularly for some sectors, but everybody's got to get there. So we've got a fantastic panel, and I'm going to invite my panelists up now. Jose Entrecanales, the Chief Executive of Acciona. Jean-Louis Chassard, Jean-Louis, the Chairman of Suez. Kerry Adler, the CEO of Sky Power. And Jean-Pascal Tricoire, the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Schneider Electric. So this panel you will have noticed from the great panellists. Firstly, we were supposed to have Rachel Kite, many of you will know, from SE for All. So I'm going to apologise that we're not as gender balanced as we should be, but I know we're going to commit to make up for it, to be much more ambitious on climate change, so you'll forgive us for that. And all of the panellists have committed to 1.5. And this is my point about new norms. The future of UN conferences, the future of events on climate change will have to have real leaders with real commitments, and I'm really pleased that we've got them here today. We're going to talk about the energy transition. And of course, the energy transition is about how we get from where we are to net zero and how we do that quickly. We know emissions need to go to net zero by 2050, but actually in the electricity sector, it probably needs to get there by 2040. Many will say this is possible, we have the technology, but there are big questions. Can we reach the scale? What about the price? What about storage? And I know some of this is going to come up with the panel of great experts. So just to say that in the electric utility sector and the electric utility services, we have 25 companies committed to a science-based target. 8 of those to 1.5, and 4 of those are represented on the panel, although certainly Suez is a kind of utility and water utility company. So we're going to move to the panellists to hear about the energy transition. Are we going to get there? How quickly are we going to get there? And what some of the challenges are. And we're going to start with Jose.
Thank you. Hi. Well, thank you. You asked a difficult question. How are we going to get there? Judging from how we've done in the past, I am worried. I mean, this group of friends sit in. We could even actually have a performance in Broadway and something. We've been sitting together and doing this kind of events for quite a few years. And the truth is that after 15 years, we are at 414 parts per million and emitting 33.1 gigatons. I mean, this is beyond what any of us would have thought would be the case 10, 15 years ago when we started being active in this. So, to be very honest, I am, on the one hand, very pessimistic, judging from how we have managed to convey our message or lead not very successfully. On the other hand, I must say that I now see a moment of different speed of change, and I see that there are elements, qualitative elements, changing. But it is a moment. It is a moment of truth. We either manage to do it this time or the next few years, and we achieve the scale that the change requires, or we're going to be in great difficulties in reaching the objectives, because we not only have increased our emissions, but we've lost 15 years, and that is a bad sign. Anyway, we can get on to what needs to be done and what do we all think needs to be done to scale it and to accelerate the change, but we definitely do.
So we have a big challenge. We've got to go faster. Jean-Louis.
I do believe that we have the technologies to achieve the 1.5 degrees by the end of this century. But for me, the question mark is, are we prepared to go at that speed, and are the populations, worldwide populations, ready to change their way of life rapidly in order to make it possible? And I have some doubt. First of all, because, as you know, the world population is growing, middle class is growing, food needs are growing, and all that needs more and more energy, and also, of course, water. And even if I do believe that circular economy, which means recycling a lot of things, including water and raw materials, is possible, the speed, for me, at which we are going to change that, to move that, is going to be something which is very sensitive. If you go too slowly, well, you will not achieve the goal. If you go too fast, you have a major risk to block the whole system, and we have seen that with the Yellow Jacket in France. When you try to do something too fast, part of the population does not agree. So really, in my view, the customer awareness of what we want to do in order to achieve this target is clearly, in my view, something which is very important. For the rest, for the technology is improving, of course, each day. Technology, in my view, is ready. We know how to improve. Often we know how to reduce costs thanks to the technologies. So we can combine the reduction of emissions and reduction of cost. Not always, but often. But at the end of the day, in my view, which is the more important point of it, is make sure that the speed of the change is acceptable for the population and acceptable for the 1.5. Thank you.
Thanks. And Kerry, I mean, all of the companies here have solutions, but your firm is based on one very specific solution.
I think that, I don't know if I'm the most pessimist or the most realistic, but, you know, I feel like I'm sitting in and have been for years, sitting in groups of rooms and with a bunch of really smart, wise, sage people. And I also feel about the story I heard once upon a time about this beautiful ship that people sat there until it crashed into an iceberg. So I feel like many of us have spent so many years talking, and it's almost like we are arranging the deck chairs in the Titanic. The only difference is there won't be a piece of ice there waiting for us if we don't figure it out now. Is there hope? There is hope, but hope is not a strategy. Hope is a nice thing to have. We can go to and believe that we can change things. I think the only future that we have for the generations to come that we are responsible for is to really pour every dollar that we have into ensuring that renewable energy, which is the cheapest form of energy today, is the energy that's acceptable in the world, and spend the billions that are necessary into the technology to make the runway longer to ensure that we can address this, because in the time frame that we have, there is no mathematical equation or science that shows us today that we will actually get there. It's just, I think we just need to accept it. It's not climate change, it is climate changed.
Jean-Pascal, you also have some of the solutions we need.
Yeah, right. As Jean-Louis was saying, I believe we have to integrate one thing. Technologies do exist to change the trajectory and put it back where it should. Now, if you look at anything we have in front of us with the present trend, even with the pledges of the country, the Accord of Paris, we are on a 3.5 and probably more temperature increase, which is absolutely not acceptable. Now, I'm optimist personally for one reason. I see some tipping points in the opinion, as Jose was saying before. The youth, which is now making it a top political agenda. You see some cities in Asia happen to live in China. Beijing, like 5 or 6 years ago, was refusing the problem. It's become a political top of the agenda, and things are getting better if you go to Beijing nowadays. Plus companies like ourselves, we are taking those commitments, and we are taking with us the whole supply chain, which are tens of thousands of companies. So I didn't speak with PwC before, but we are exactly, from the figures I could hear before, on a scenario that could bring that trajectory from 3.5 to 1.5, and it's pretty simple. It's just integrating that technologies have changed and used to the maximum power digital for saving, for sharing better, on circular economy, which really can be organized. And again, that does exist. And we are not speaking about retouching everything. It's just doing 30 to 50% more efficiency on everything which is retrofitted and revamped every year, which is 2% of building and industries. Second thing, as PwC was saying before, doubling electrification, because it's the only way to get to a decarbonized form of energy. And third thing, to take on what you were saying, is going to renewable from 6 to 40% within the next 20 years. Again, not off reach. The biggest problem is rethinking everything we do. I tell you, I don't know what's the experience, but when you will go into that commitment of 1.5 degrees for Schneider, 200 factories, 100 logistics centers, presence in 100 countries, that means we revisit everything we do. Square meters we occupy, the generation of energy that used to be taken from distant grid has to be more local, on maximum use of technology. And we have a path to make it happen. So if everybody does it, or at least the most advanced of all of us, we are on the trajectory to have 2% of the install base every year retrofitted and go in the right direction.
That's great, and I just want to say that I'm also an optimist, and we didn't rehearse the panel in this way. So I want to acknowledge, one, the panel being really honest about the climate emergency. My US media briefing says don't use that word in the United States. Well, I come from a country where my government says there is a climate emergency in the United Kingdom, so I am going to use that word. But the panel acknowledges that. We haven't done enough. We have to go fast. We need a radical transformation. So if Greta Thunberg was sitting here, she'd say, well, what are you going to do? Right? What are we going to do? People in positions of power and responsibility, and I know all of you in your companies, you're doing great things. So what are we going to do? What do we need? What do you need from policymakers? What, as your companies are going to do to meet this 1.5 goal? And not just you as your companies, but to get everybody involved.
So, if I may add on one. If there is one thing that we should all think about, is that if your strategy of your company is hitting the wall of sustainability, you are in a very bad place. I see in our business, some of the companies that invested a lot in technologies to support fossil generation. Most of them had to sell and fire sell those assets, because at one stage during a number of years, the hysteresis or tradition has made that those companies were keeping on investing, their customers, and suddenly the market was divided by two. So if you are not sustainable in your business, at one stage, history is coming back on you and is putting your company in very dire straits. So I think the first thing to do is to revisit the strategy of our companies and make sure that we go into the right direction from that point of view.
Well, in your case, we are, of course, developing technology which are consuming far less energy. For example, membranes technology in order to treat water. You can reduce the energy you need to treat wastewater by 30-40% just by new membranes technology, which allow you a better transfer of oxygen in the water. To give you an example like that, there is many. It's a question of technologies first, and after that is a question, as I was mentioning before, make sure that the customer or customers are ready to pay for the technology. At one point in time, the new technology will probably cost less than the present one, but it's not everywhere the same. So I think we have to put a combination together, a combination of, I should say, technology that will be very effective tomorrow with existing technology and pushing all forward and pushing also for the customer to accept that in order, at the end of the day, to be competitive and also to reduce quite a lot. We in Suez try to reduce the emissions by 35 to 45% now for our customer by 2035, which is a huge number.
We, in our case, we have a special situation because we're a renewable energy company, among other things, and our non-emission generation is non-emitting generation by far exceeds all of our generation. However, we need to what we are now achieving, we're now trying to achieve, is reducing the emissions by 60%, 65%. By 2025. The most, I mean, I could go into a myriad of specific policies that we're applying, but there is a pretty magic mechanism that I think is applicable to almost any company, which is internal CO2 costs. You apply strong internal CO2 prices, and the whole thing falls down in the organization. Bonuses, P&L, specific unit come to losses, and I mean, when you have as you all know, a big company, it's very difficult to get micro. So you need to get very macro on the decisions, and the executives need to invent the solutions to the problem, and that happens, and it happens very fast. So from that point, from the in-house point of view, that I think is the star measure. However, I'm afraid that no matter how much we do in-house, we still have a huge problem of scale. I mean, this is a room full of convinced. I mean, this is preaching among the converted. I mean, there are millions of companies outside this room who haven't even heard about this. I mean, they don't know and they don't care. My biggest concern is what's done from policymakers, from regulators, from all organisms that have a say to reach those guys, to reach those companies, to reach those actors. If we don't do that, and if we don't do that fast, we're not going to manage. We're not going to manage to solve this problem, and that's possibly I wouldn't be able to account it. But if we're investing about half of what needs to be invested in infrastructures in order to reach the appropriate levels, we need all those actors active. We need all those actors being very, very, very much on the front line to achieve that. So incorporating those outsiders into our fight is the key to me.
Thanks, Jose. So everybody should use a high internal carbon price in making their investment decisions. Kerry, we hear a lot about wind and solar prices becoming really competitive with fossil fuels. We also hear a lot about the problem of storage. How do you see particularly solar prices competing, and where are we? Do we have great solutions coming down the pipe for energy storage?
Yeah, I think I just want to say one thing on the last point before I share with you some really exciting news in the solar industry, because, you know, I may sound pessimistic, but I think I really am a realist. I mean, everyone in this room is smart enough to understand the Sustainable Development Goals, and that's not the challenge. The challenge is we can go out and educate 10 people, and they can educate 10 people. When you do the math, there's still not enough people. You know, we look at this problem that the world faces, and my children and future grandchildren, and realize that it's really the youth that need to carry this message. And we believe there's really a three-pronged plan, at least from Sky Power and through my family, how we're really looking at what we can contribute. And the first is a low-tech plan. If you do the math, and the science is compelling, but if you said for one day every year, every human being alive that was capable planted one seedling, and if it planted the right type of seedling, in 5 to 7 years that would grow to a tree, and that tree could be used for building materials. When you look at the amount of carbon that is taken back from that tree, if every living man, woman, and child over the age of 18 or even younger could plant a tree and create a challenge, and the challenge we're calling it POP, Protect Our Planet. It's a universal word. You know, we want everyone to be a pop star. That's a low-tech, something that children could do, youth can do. Why not? We celebrate Christmas. We celebrate, in some countries, Thanksgiving, in other countries, other holidays. So protect our planet, plant a tree. Imagine what 6 billion trees would do to this environment. So while that is a low-tech plan that at least gets people understanding, children understanding, the way to get that started is actually at the educational level, at the school level, because that's where they'll start learning. So they're going to impact change from the back, from the youth. At a high-tech perspective, I can tell you that solar energy is now the most cost-effective form of power in the world. It's not a construction project. It's actually assembly. We've seen prices as low as 2.5 to 3 cents in developing countries, countries that really don't have any electricity. And we've seen wind fall to 4 or 5 cents. I was with the president of OPEC about a month and a half ago, and he was sharing that at the price of natural gas today, which as many of you know, you can't buy it very far in the future, solar is cheaper. And you don't have to build the lines to deliver the gas to people's homes. But the problem is when the sun goes down or the wind does not blow, there's no electricity. It's intermittent. And after about 10 years of research, we've announced in Monaco in the month of May a battery that fits into 2 shipping containers that has capability of storing 1 gigawatt of power, can charge and discharge in under a second. And the challenge that we're facing, believe it or not, was not inventing that battery. Is we're working very hard with some of the smartest people around the world. I've sought some of the advice from people like John Kerry, Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed, and we're trying to find a way to how do we give this to the world. But that battery with solar power, depending on the credit of that country, could be 4 to 6 cents, 24/7. Now that is profound enough to have the oil companies and the gas companies really start focusing on other specialty reasons for those materials or those liquids. We have to stop the emissions. You know, I can tell you that we were proud to be the first company to drop the price of energy in India below the price of coal. However, that doesn't mean that India is going to shut the coal because they employ 6 million people. So we've got to band together. POP, protect our planet, look at solar in any way we can, and I think it's really up to education. We've got to educate the youth how important it is, because if they don't stand up like they did in the last week and go home after this is over, we are not going to get there. We have no more time.
Thank you. So we have some fantastic stories coming out of the panel. We're going to move to questions from the audience. I think we have some microphones. We do have some microphones. And if you're going to have a question, please your name, where you're from, and if you can keep your questions short, we'll take 3 at a time. Who'd like to go first? Fike, are you going to answer a question? No. You're waving your hand.
This is what I did.
Any questions from the audience on the energy transition and 1.5? Look, we can carry on. No questions. Yes, please. When one person goes, always the next 5 do.
Sorry, Soraya, RE International. I work in the developing world, third world, very fragile states, and they all need power to grow. So they're desperate for power. They're desperate to grow, because without it they can't. No manufacturing, nothing. So they're obliged to go for the solutions that they can get based on the credit potential. Normally it's heavy oil, it's generators, it's emissions, it's dirty, it's problematic, but they need it. How, amongst yourselves, are you working to actually allow them access to cheaper power and cheaper implementation of this power through maybe public-private, maybe supporting the government? How are you making the transition from the first world to the developing that actually really needs it?
Great question. Any other questions? Yeah, we have one here and one here. Thank you. So the first question, yeah, how can we help people leapfrog?
Kevin with Shaloub Group. My question to you is, how can policymakers help with carbon pricing, aligning incentives for businesses with these targets of reducing to 1.5 degrees?
Thank you. And the gentleman here, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Linus Morfo from the Economic Commission for Africa, and thanks for the great insight. And I think the point I want to raise is related to this. When countries say that they're discovering fossil fuels, coal, oil, gas, and so on, and we tell them that technology costs are coming down, you can transition to clean energy sources. Then the next question they ask is, okay, what should we do with the assets that we have? And I think the panel mentioned that we have the technology options. What kind of technology options can we tell the countries that you can use to use those resources without emitting, without releasing emissions to? So we should have a double win by going transition to clean energy, but also using those resources, using technologies, new technologies, in ways that don't cause emissions. What kind of answers can we give them?
Great, thank you. Who would like to take it, please? Jean-Pascal.
Yeah, I can just offer a testimony of what we do in emerging countries. We happen to do roughly 50% of our business in emerging countries. And I think when you develop from scratch power in a country, this is actually even a better place to ask the question between old ways of doing and new ways of doing, because what we are describing here is vastly decentralized. It's based on local generation for local communities, or even building by building or manufacturing by manufacturing. And by doing that, yes, the technologies once again are existing, accumulating or putting together storage on renewable energy and local microgrid, smart grid, managing in the proper manner. And that saves you all infrastructure of transmission and distribution. So that means you have to compare apple to apple. So that raises a question. Then now, how do you do that? I think the biggest question is partly financing, but there is a lot of finance which is looking for good usage today. But it's a lot about people and skilling. So if you take our example, 80 million people that we supply with new energy in a plan that goes into the next 10 years, we have, together with that, a plan of training 1 million people, 1 million youngsters, to those new technologies, which frankly today universities or technical schools are not training for, because by definition they are new technologies. So that's what you have to do, and they have to be local. It's not about something that comes from central. You have to train the people locally who take care of their community. So it's a technical, social, and educational project, which is very exciting.
Great. Would anyone like to pick up any of these other
I just would like to add that, in my view, financing, it's absolutely a key issue. I mean, the transfer of technology from, I say, north to south, to simplified, can be done, as it was just mentioned by Jean-Pascal, but in many cases, you need to have the right financing in order to offer those technologies to those growing new countries' population. So I think we can speak as much as we want about sustainability. Sustainability needs financing, and financing are necessary to develop a series of countries which will not be able to develop themselves with low carbon emission technologies if there is no substantial help coming from the north. In my view, it's absolutely clear. It's clear for energy, it's clear for water, it's clear for many technologies. We talk a lot about energy, but you know, the people will not stay in their home if they don't have at the same time the technology to provide fresh water to the cities. So the combinations of financing and technology is absolutely necessary if we want to achieve the 1.5 degrees.
One comment to your question, a short one. We have, I encourage you to look at our web, a project in Latin America from Mexico down to Chile, which is the Acciona Microenergy effort, which is very successful. And it basically what it does is in off-grid areas, very poor areas, we started by creating a foundation that in itself developed into a business, a local business, which is now covering about 80,000 families or so in different countries. And it basically creates the ecosystem where there's guys who start repairing, the government puts a tariff that is, instead of substitute in Peru, instead of having to put a electricity transport and distribution lines, they actually subsidize the family, the unit photovoltaic systems. So it's actually growing very fast. The underlying secret is that there is a business underneath, so that it grows naturally and autonomously without needing to have to pour money into it. And just very quickly, Paul, if you allow me, to somebody was asking about policies. I mean, policies, public procurement, end to subsidies, the European taxonomy. That's going to be a great thing. I mean, that's going to be a world changer in this industry. Capital requirements for banks, so making that capital requirements for financial institutions take into account the environmental or the emission side of their activity. IFRS accounting rules for companies that take into there's hundreds of little things that can be done, all regulatory related, that can really be very effective, I believe.
I just wanted to say, I mean, I agree that finance is critical, and because without money, it doesn't matter how much or what type of energy or solutions you can deliver. But I want to leave you with one thing, and that is, we have to solve this climate change issue quick, because on the heels of this is a water problem. By 2050, it's estimated that 30% of the human population will not have access to clean drinking water. So if we can't lick this problem, we got another one coming around the corner, and that's where we really need to put the efforts today, because with renewable energy, cheap energy, you can desalinize water. You could deliver clean drinking water to the people that are thirsty. Today, you may have people on the streets marching for action. Fast forward 5 or 7 years, you're going to have people on the streets acting a lot more violent, demanding fresh drinking water.
Thanks, Kerry. So we're coming back to the end of the panel. Very, very quickly, we've had a really, healthy dose of realism, some very ambitious and committed companies. So I want you to end just very, very quickly because of time. You can see the clock this way along. What gives you most hope we're going to get to 1.5? Jose.
I was hoping I was going to go last. What gives me more hope? What gives me more hope? Well, the fact that it now seems that policymakers around the table, this particular case, this particular year, are committed.
Fantastic. The next panel is policymakers, so this is great. Jean-Louis.
Consumer and young generations' awareness and sensibility to the situation, in my view, they are going to change the world.
Cellular mobile technology and youth, I think that they've had enough, and they're not waiting anymore. They want change, and they want change now, and they're going to drive us.
John Pascal.
Youth. I think the pressure is there and the demand is there, so count on them.
Fantastic. I want to thank the panel. I mean, what does give me a lot of hope is the 650 companies and the 87 committed to 1.5. What will give all of us more hope is every single company in the room that hasn't committed to a science-based target needs to do so by the end of the week. Many colleagues here from UN Global Compact and others, we have got no time to wait. We've heard that. So thank you to the panelists.